I'd like them to know how hard it is for people to access medical care. I used to hope, that a politician would come to Port Lincoln one day and have a heart attack, so that they could be on the receiving end in a country town. Never happened. Lucky for them.
Thanks for reaching out as well.
No problem.
For getting in contact with us. I'm here with Rufus today. Rufus, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm a retired doctor. I came to Port Lincoln about 40-something years ago to be a general physician, and I did that until about 18 months ago. Yeah. I loved it, but getting old, and there comes a time to retire. So when I was training as a medical student, I always wanted to be a country doctor. For me, that was the holy grail, And initially I was planning on becoming a general practitioner, but then, with one thing and another, I turned into a specialist. So a lot of people don't know the difference between a general practitioner and a general physician. So shall I explain that briefly?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So when you finish medical training, you've done your intern, you have to choose what you're going to do for further training. So your choices essentially are becoming a general practitioner, doing general practice, or becoming a physician, which includes people such as cardiologists, rheumatologists, neurologists, all those sorts of people. Or you can do surgery. There's a couple of other things you can do, like eyes, or you can do obstetrics and gynecology. I went into training to become a physician, and I spent some time trying to decide whether to be a cardiologist or a gastroenterologist. In fact, I was offered the cardiology training post at Flinders, but I turned it down. I did spend a couple of years in the UK doing cardiology, and I spent a year back in Adelaide trying to decide whether I really wanted to be a gastroenterologist or a cardiologist. And I couldn't make a decision because my nature is that I like all sorts of stuff. And so I became a general physician. And that was kind of promoted by being asked by the then incumbent general physician in Port Lincoln, a guy called Brian Penfold. Hello, Brian, if you're watching. And I came and did a locum for him, and I loved it. I just loved it. So it was like going to the country, but as a general physician, as a specialist, not as a general practitioner. Okay. So that's what I have done. And for roughly the first half of my time in Port Lincoln, I was sort of a de facto cardiologist, and the second half I was a de facto gastroenterologist, but I did lots of other things as well. And part of the reason I did a lot of other things is because it's hard for people in the country to get to Adelaide to have access to those specialist services.
That is something that we are hearing time and time again.
Well, I can tell you firsthand that it is very hard. Even if when I was working, if I wanted to get a patient in to see a rheumatologist, for example, even if they had private health insurance, they would have to wait between 3 and 6 months to get an appointment. There was a rheumatologist visiting Whyalla, which is a mere 3 hours drive if you've got a car that works and is reliable. But at some point a few years ago, when I wanted to refer a patient to him, he did close his books because his waiting time was over 18 months long, well, over 12 months, nearly 18 months long. So he just said no to new patients. So there was no other option for those people but to go to Adelaide. And if you're old, if you're not financially kind of independent, it's a real exercise for people to get to Adelaide. And some people just said, "Oh, I can't go." End of story. And they suffer as a result.
So obviously they suffer as a result, but the snowball of that back here, if they don't go, what happens here?
Well, I guess some of those people, not specifically rheumatology, but rheumatology was just one example, but there are multiple examples. So people can have multiple presentations if they don't get to see a cardiologist and get to be sorted out quickly. They can have multiple presentations to accident and emergency with chest pain or cardiac arrhythmias, when your heart beats too fast or doesn't beat fast enough. So yeah, it's just not good for the patients, really. Yeah. Neurologists, people who have headaches, funny sensory symptoms somewhere. If you want to see a neurologist in Adelaide now, minimum wait 6 months. Even I couldn't just ring up a neurologist and say, I've got this patient who needs to be seen. I mean, if they were bad enough to actually be admitted to a hospital like the RA, sure, we could put them in hospital and transfer them because some of those people just, they physically can't get on a plane and go, often because of the condition. Same applies to some, gastroenterological cases. It's really hard to tell somebody who's having to use their bowels every 30 minutes, passing, loose, bloody stools and got abdominal pain to get on a plane. You can't sit around in a waiting room in an airport and then get on a plane like that. Yet those people aren't often sick enough to necessarily be admitted to hospital.
So you would say there's a shortfall here.
Well,
of
yes,
how that
yes. The reason
part of the
reason I'm speaking to you is that I know that since I hung up my boots or whatever the phrase is, since I pulled the plug, I know that there is a shortfall in services, and I started counting some cases. I think I got up to about 70 rheumatological type cases, and a lot of those people I started seeing because they couldn't get access to rheumatology in Adelaide. Same goes for people with neurology cases, and the same goes for gastro cases. So, inflammatory bowel disease, for example, is a really an increasingly frequent disorder. The incidence has been going up for a number of years in all Western countries, including Australia. And 10 years ago, there would have been something like 75,000, 80,000 people in Australia with inflammatory bowel disease, and it just keeps going up. And it often affects young people, forced to take time off work. And the treatment for inflammatory bowel disease has become a lot better, but very complex and very expensive. So the federal government has put hurdles in the way of doctors wanting to prescribe certain treatments for those people. And to get them, you have to see somebody who's recognised as a gastroenterologist. Now, fortunately, I was, but until about 10 years ago, I kind of, if I had somebody with anything more than this common or garden inflammatory bowel disease, I would want to refer them to a gastroenterologist. But it became logistically impossible for all those people to be catered for in town, and so I basically had to learn how to do it. And when I finished, I had about 100 patients with inflammatory bowel disease. Now, if it weren't for the fact that there was a financial reward in doing procedures like colonoscopy and endoscopy, we wouldn't have a gastroenterologist come to Port Lincoln. But because there's financial reward in it, gastroenterologists will do that. The same applies to cardiologists. Because there's a financial reward in doing procedures and investigations, it's actually worth their while to come to a country centre. But for rheumatology, neurology, there's no financial advantage for them, but there are a lot of non-financial disincentives, like the hassle of organising a trip, putting all your work back in town on hold, continuing to pay for your office and your secretarial staff while you come to Port Lincoln, and probably don't earn much more than a Medicare rebate. If the plane that's going to bring you to Port Lincoln actually flies, and plenty of times I've seen whole cardiology lists cancelled because the plane wouldn't fly, and it's a really stroke of luck.
Whole day disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those people, they get their appointment by phone, but until COVID came along and made people in the government realise that actually you could have consultations over teleconferencing and that sort of thing. That wasn't, you couldn't charge for that, but because of COVID, you can. So a lot of those sort of missed appointments can be catered for, but it's not the same thing as actually having a face-to-face discussion with somebody. Just not the same.
It's not. And
no.
It almost seems like a ticky flick sometimes.
Yeah.
When you have those appointments over the phone.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I see a urologist on a regular basis, and it's a phone conversation, and it lasts less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow. But if that wasn't available, if he couldn't charge me for that, I would actually have to go to Adelaide, or wait until urologists are surgeons, like bladders and prostates and kidneys and things, and surgeons do financially well out of doing procedures. So we have surgeons here, but we also have visiting surgical specialists, like gynecological surgery comes over. And can I think of another one? No, not off the top of my head, but yeah.
Anything that you love about the region?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I still go back to Adelaide every now. In fact, now that I've retired, I can drive to Adelaide because for me and my wife to drive to Adelaide, stopping overnight in Port Augusta, because 8 hours drive in one go is too much for 70-plus-year-old. It costs us less to drive and stay overnight in Port Augusta, even if we go to the Standpipe and have a curry, than one airplane ticket to Port Lincoln. That's how expensive it is. But now I can drive, so I go back to Adelaide relatively often. And when I get into Adelaide traffic and I see the smog haze, and all the people I go and see they look out their window and they see the neighbour's window, and I can't bear it. I have to live in the country. Don't fence me in. So I love living in the country. But the things that when I first came to Port Lincoln, I thought, I'm going to do sailing. I haven't told you that story before, but I did have this idea that I wanted to get into sailing, and I used to read books about building boats and stuff when I was a kid. But once I got here and actually went sailing a couple of times, so I thought, no, it's just not for me, But that was an attraction when I first came, and there's a lot of people here who do sail. And fishing, I'm pretty keen on fishing. So I'm planning on going to the Cook Islands later this year to do some fishing for big fish. But I like my fishing, and it's a great place to go fishing. We had 2 daughters who went to the local schools, and both of us felt that Port Lincoln is a fantastic place to bring up children. They can walk around on the streets, very low risk. If I wouldn't have my daughters walking around on the streets of Adelaide at night, just wouldn't do it. So it was a great place to bring up kids. When the time came, one of them chose to go to boarding school, the other one chose to stay and finish matric here. They both did fine. So I think there are more options with high school now than there used to be, but not too bad. So it's a great place to bring up kids. I know of people children who moved back to Adelaide for one reason or another, and their children went from being able to do multiple activities like sailing and camping and so on, to being stuck in the city, and they just got sucked into bad things like drugs and so you can keep city life. Also, I think something slightly not sure that I really anticipated it, but it's a great feeling to actually be part of a community, and I don't think people get that in the city. They just don't understand what it's like. And almost like the smaller the town, the more cohesive the community is. Port Lincoln, it's getting to, 15,000, something like that. But it's still a pretty small community, and a lot of people know what's going on. And people feel supported, and so I like that. And I liked being, as a medical practitioner, I liked being sort of appreciated, and local people in small towns really appreciate the fact that people come and stay. Good doctors who come and they go, and they're good doctors, but it's not the same as having somebody who sticks around, who's kind of, if you like, on your side in the community and
advocating for you
advocating for. Yeah, long-term follow-up. It's called continuity of care, and it's a really important thing. And unfortunately, the way things are now, continuity of care is not so good, especially on the specialist level. It's broken up, so you don't get to form a relationship with a particular practitioner over a long period of time. Somebody that you can trust, there are GPs who stick around and they who are good, and they're really hard to get into because they're good and everyone likes them. Everyone wants to see somebody that they know who's part of the community rather than just a locum.
So we've been really blessed with people like yourself having the continuity of care over a certain amount of years. We're obviously seeing now that there's going to be a shortfall in that moving forward.
Yeah.
How would you see a solution or a mechanism to help?
Right. Well, okay. So that's my current little project, if you want to call it that, is I don't believe that the services that are missing are going to be provided by the private health sector, right? Because it's just financially not. It's not just financially not rewarding. There are positive disincentives in place to prevent people from coming, right? So the hospital, our hospital, used to be a sort of community hospital run by GPs, and people who would be admitted to hospital by their GP, they'd receive specialist care with the GP in hospital, and then they would go home to the GP, and the GP would know exactly what happened in hospital. And now, they go to hospital and they see people who don't know anything about them and just treat them, and then they get discharged. And unfortunately, the quality of communication between the hospital doctors and GPs is not very good, and it's not just our hospital. I think that's a sort of problem even in the city. People come back from Adelaide with discharge letters, and they're wrong. They just contain errors. So being there and seeing it all was great, and so much so that probably 20 odd years ago, I was visiting a school in the Barossa Valley, and one of the teachers there, who didn't know at the time that I was a doctor, made this comment that he had lived in Port Lincoln, had taught in Port Lincoln, and he made this spontaneous comment about how great the medical services were. I don't know if you know this, but this healthcare planning that goes on now, the pilot studies for that were done in Port Lincoln and based on practice in Port Lincoln. So Port Lincoln general practice 20 years ago was highly regarded. And I think the GPs are still good, but the system around them makes it difficult to deliver that kind of care. I've forgotten the question now, but now the hospital, the hospital it's sort of been taken over by SA Health in whatever guise. They keep changing their names, so it's hard to keep up with them. But the hospital does have some. There's one resident general physician who does some of the things that I would have done in hospital, but doesn't work outside the hospital. So no private practice, it's one outpatient session a week, which is not going to be enough. And mostly it's staffed by locums, and it's sort of run by SA Health. So what I used to do outside the hospital, so in a normal week, I'd have spent all of Monday, all of Tuesday, and all of Thursday consulting, seeing patients, like 3 full days a week, just gone. Right? Now, I don't think I wasn't doing anything useful. The other days I used to do procedures and things like stress testing and colonoscopies and endoscopy, that sort of stuff. So I think it's a responsibility of the state government to pick up the gaps in healthcare here and provide basically what people expect in Adelaide. So those things like rheumatology and neurology, and now I've heard that from a reliable source that the visiting endocrinologist is not taking new patients because he or she is going to stop coming in the next 6 months. And the dermatologist who's been coming long-term is also pulled out. So there's not just a couple of specialists, it's across the board. And then there are all those people who don't fit neatly into one or other criteria, or people who have multiple problems. I used to see people who had cardiology problem, that have a gastroenterology problem, might have an endocrinology problem, and some other stuff. And I would be able to see that person one visit and deal with 3 problems. If that person was in Adelaide, and I mean, I'm now promoting the idea of general physicians because that's what general physicians can and should be doing, long-term management of multi-system disease. So in Adelaide, that person might go and see the endocrinologist about their diabetes, they might go and see a gastroenterologist about their inflammatory bowel disease, and they might go and see the cardiologist about their atrial fibrillation, and taxpayers pay 3 times. So general physicians save money when they work like that. But anyway, there are gaps now, and my hope would be that the SA Health, Country Health, whatever they call themselves now, could actually put together a team, say, using the example of rheumatology again, a rheumatologist, a senior rheumatologist from one of the teaching hospitals, doesn't have to be the same person every time, an advanced trainee who's like nearly a rheumatologist, maybe a specialist physiotherapist or occupational therapist, put those people on a plane, fly them to Port Lincoln, put them up in the new hotel for a couple of nights. They can see patients, so like do a 2-3 day blitz seeing anybody that's got rheumatological problems. While they're here, they can give some educational sessions, teaching for the local GPs, and then fly home. And if they had a good, I'm sure they would enjoy doing that teaching and seeing patients if they had a good time, and then I don't think they would object. But somebody's got to pay them. It's got to come out of the budget somewhere, and So I think that could be done with rheumatology. I think it could be done with neurology. We don't need to do it with cardiology because we have visiting cardiologists, one of whom was really taken to Port Lincoln, has actually bought rooms here and wants to spend more time here. So that's fantastic. Yes, and an endocrinologist, endocrinological services. There's plenty of type 1 diabetics around the place, not to mention the vast numbers of type 2 diabetics, and thyroid disease. And the thyroid disorders are really common. And they're not, by and large, they're not that hard to manage. And my view is that any general physician worth his salt should be able to manage basic endocrinology problems. And if, the general idea about our care system is you have the GPs who manage kind of everything, but if things get too hard for them, they have to decide to send them to a surgeon or a physician of one sort or another. And if they go to a general physician, and that general physician can manage a whole lot of problems, but there's a few people who are a little bit more complicated, so they then go up to the next care. They might go and see a gastroenterologist, and amongst rheumatologists and cardiologists, there are some who have particular expertise in some fields. So not every cardiologist does all cardiology. You have cardiologists that do angiograms. You have cardiologists that do electrophysiological studies, like putting in pacemakers and doing ablations for atrial fibrillation. That's highly specialised. And one of the lecturers, one of the senior gastroenterologists, used to work still does work at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, used to start every meeting that I ever went to where she was a presenter by saying, nobody knows everything, right? Feel free to ask questions, but it's true, there's just too much for any person to know now. And even within a specialty, there are specialties. So it's a spectrum. And general physicians, in my view, and I think I'll be speaking out of turn, but in the view of the general physicians sort of craft group, are not really being trained the way I was, for example, and they are becoming kind of sidelined into things like rehabilitation and geriatrics, whereas they could play a significant role in managing a lot of those diseases, like, say, rheumatoid arthritis. It's a pretty common systemic inflammatory arthritis. And the majority of those people can be managed relatively simple with tablets, sometimes injections, and they don't really need to go and see a rheumatologist, in my humble opinion. But there are people who don't respond to those measures, and then they need drugs that cost a lot of money and have significant side effects. There's complexity in using them. Those are the people that need to go and see a rheumatologist. Like they're the next tier up.
So it's almost like it could be triaged here a lot better to not block up those services.
Absolutely, yeah. Now I'm not sure if you're referring to the sort of all the work that's going to A&E. Well, so that, to my way of thinking, that is a pretty straightforward problem. The problem is that there's no after-hours general practice service. So what do you do at 5 o'clock if you're a GP and you finish your consulting, seeing your last patient of the day? You put your answering machine on and says you've got a problem, dial 000 or go to the local hospital. Right? Don't bother me. I'm going home to have a glass of wine and a meal and spend the evening with my wife. I used to remember as a kid, my old man was a doctor too, so he would get phone calls. He'd be eating his dinner, he'd get a phone call, and he'd go up to the room to his office, which is in the house, and see somebody. There was no let-up. He was on call. Him and had a group of 2 or 3 of them that used to look after each other's after-hours work on weekends. That's all gone now. General practice is 9 to 5. And it's too hard.
Illness doesn't go 9 to 5.
No, absolutely, yeah. Which, well, I kept telling people years ago that the hospital was too small. They hadn't had enough beds, and they said, "Oh, but we've got no. Look at the board. It's half empty." Well, that's the problem when you have a small population. Is that sometimes everybody's pretty well, and there's only a few patients in hospital, and then for some reason the number of people who get sick goes up. It's not the same all the time. It goes up and down. So sometimes you've got an empty ward, and sometimes you don't know where to put people. And the powers that be, the bean counters, they need to be prepared for that. They also need to know that for South Australia is a very big area. South Australia is kind of unique, almost like Western Australia, but unique in the sense that most of the population's in the city. That's where all the services are. And there's this scattering of people spread over a really wide area, like your electorate. And getting services to those people has always been a challenge. And so I think that the city's fine, but there need to be some satellite areas where those services can go and be delivered, rather than expecting everybody to go to the city, because it just ain't fair in my view. And I don't know how much the PATS system pays out every year, but it must be a lot of money, and it will be going up all the time. And I'm pretty sure that since I've retired, it will have gone up more. The PATS system is not generous. They were paying something like $40 for a night's accommodation until recently. I don't know if that change has come in, but there's been some kind of electoral promise that it's going to go up. But what can you get? Accommodation for $40 a night. And it doesn't count taxis. You can't ask for taxis, right? And the system is made so hard. I've been to Adelaide to have some treatment, right? And I've actually applied for PATS. I'm not dumb. And my wife is pretty smart. She managed the business side of my affairs, thank goodness, because my arithmetic's terrible. But between us, it was a challenge to get all that paperwork done. And people who maybe can't read English so well, there's Greeks and Croatians and Italians and probably now people from other countries, but or if your educational level is not so high, it just must be a nightmare.
So it would be really easy for people just to give up.
They do give up.
And just go.
They give up and they say, "Oh, it's too hard. I'll just pay." Or and people who do merit PATS go and put in all their paperwork, and the PATS office writes back to them and says, "No, you don't qualify." And I've had to waste my time writing letters to the PATS office saying, yes, this patient does qualify. You know, I mean,
so that's where the red tape comes in.
The people who are administering the system don't know anything about how medicine works. You know, they're just clerks. I'm sorry if you're a clerk, but that's the way it goes. You know, if my fridge breaks down, I don't call a doctor. I call a fridge mechanic.
Yeah.
Right?
How many times do you think you have seen physicians or GPs actually physically hand over cash to patients to help them?
Once or twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, to me, resonates with the country doctor feel, with their doctors and alike go that extra further step.
There's absolutely no denying the commitment of country doctors to their people. Yeah. New doctors who are new to the area, should I say new to our culture, locums, maybe not, but if they're been in the town for a while, there's a certain degree of loyalty to
which ties
your
in that community feel.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
In a region.
Yeah.
Someone in Parliament, what would you wish that they understood about our region in particular, whether it's
I'd like them to know how hard it is for people to access medical care. You know, I used to hope that a politician would come to Port Lincoln one day and have a heart attack. You know, so that they could be on the receiving end in a country town. Never happened. Lucky for them, but you know, they'd have got good care from me and GPs. They would have got excellent care. But they would have kind of understood then maybe, you know, what's involved for people who have those kinds of problems that live here all the time. I did actually once, I did actually have, got asked to see somebody who was staying in Coffin Bay. I don't remember what the problem was. I think he had some kind of funny turn. And he was staying with a Adelaide hospital-based physician, general physician. And they brought him to the local hospital from Coffin Bay. And I got asked to see him, and I thought, you know, he's okay, we'll just do this and do that and probably let you go home tomorrow. And his general physician mate from, I'm pretty sure it's the Royal Adelaide Hospital, even if I could remember his name, I wouldn't say it. He kind of looked down his nose at me and said, oh, and I think we need to transfer him to Adelaide. You know, so he was prepared to kind of use his seniority to push for this guy to be airlifted to Adelaide in an air ambulance, and he didn't really need it. That's the kind of feel those people have got for the quality of care here, and they're prepared to kind of override that when it suits them. You know, if it's a mate, so you know, if it was the sort of deputy premier who was in hospital with, you know, acute GI bleed, which we could manage just fine, thank you very much, until it becomes complicated. But let's say some problem that we can manage fine. But I have absolutely no doubt that people would be on the phone in a second getting this person airlifted to Adelaide. No doubt at all. So it's good. If it's good enough for the goose, it should be good enough for the gander. But people who live in the city, they just don't get it. When COVID was on, just as a kind of not an example of not getting it, there was a little article in one of the journals I read, written by a psychiatrist. And this person, a psychiatrist, had the story went, oh, you know, I saw this patient who lives in some town out in rural Victoria, and she said he or she saw them regularly, and that person had to get in their car, drive for 4 hours, stay overnight in somewhere in Melbourne, then come to their office, have their appointment for half an hour, and then drive 3 or 4 hours back to where they came from. And COVID came along, and they were able to do it by a video conference. And that's when she realised what a terrible inconvenience it was for this person to have to drive, like 7 hours there and back overnight in hotel, leave the family. Like, this is somebody who needs psychiatric care, and they've got to leave all their support systems and go to Melbourne. So I thought, I mean, how dumb can you be not to understand that people have to go through that? Access to imaging studies, right? I wanted to send a lady who she needed an MRI and for inflammatory bowel disease. So I wrote the form, and Whyalla had recently had their MRI machine put in. Okay, so actually, I think that MRI machine's been put in Port Lincoln since I retired.
It has.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this might be, but it's still kind of gives you an idea of what people have had to go through. And we'll still have to go through one level, one way or another. Anyway, this girl had to find somebody she had to take time off work. She had to find somebody to babysit her 2 kids. Right? While she went, she had to do some kind of preparation. She drove all the way to Whyalla to have this MRI. She was 10 minutes out of Whyalla, and they said, the machine's broken. So she had to drive back home, and when I saw her the next time, I asked her if she'd had her MRI. She told me that story, and I mean, she was in tears, and I wanted her to go and have the MRI again, and she just, no, I can't do it. Can't do it. It's like emotionally, she'd all this time, my husband worked. She's got kids have got to be looked after by. It's a major exercise. She did eventually have it, but it took 12 months, I think, for her to get the MRI, which she should have had done. Like, I needed to know what was going on in that particular spot. Then I didn't want to wait 12 months to find out.
Exactly. So when it's imperative, you still can't get it straight up.
So if you went to Adelaide for an MRI and it was broken, I don't know what they do. Maybe the companies, the radiology companies, because they are companies, they would have other machines. They could, if they knew you were from the country, they would probably say, okay, well, go to our rooms over in such and such a place and have it done there.
I think the machine that's been put in Port Lincoln has been fairly well self-funded too.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So
yeah. That's run by Paul Isaacs. I used to go to the gym with Paul Isaacs. We shared a PT, so
the risk.
Yeah, I should go and say hello. Hi, Paul, if you're watching.
The risk that people are taking for the benefit of our community with financial support is massive as well.
You know how colonoscopy services started in Port Lincoln?
Because you bought your own machine.
I said to my surgical colleague, I'm going to buy a colonoscope. I wrote to the SA Health Commission, and they said, "No, you don't need that." And I'd forgotten, but a few years ago, my previous surgical colleague's secretary found old correspondence and showed it to me. I thought, oh, okay. Yeah. So they told us we didn't need it. I was sending patients to Adelaide to have colonoscopies. So I told my colleague that I was going to buy a colonoscope and start doing it. Teach myself. Less than 2 years earlier, when I was training in Adelaide, my boss was teaching himself to do it. Right? Back in those days, you had to teach yourself because there were no courses, right? So, so I go now. You can go to courses and you can be trained by people who've done tens of thousands of colonoscopies. And obviously, it's a lot better. But that's kind of how progress in medicine goes, really. Somebody tries to do something and works it out, and they make all the mistakes, and then the juniors coming up learn from that. They don't have to make those mistakes. But anyway, so I said to my colleague, I'm going to buy a colonoscope. He said, okay, I'll go your halves. So we funded the machine. We bought the machine. We paid for the nurse to clean the scope in between procedures. We did everything. And now, like when I stopped working, I was doing about 500 colonoscopies a year, and the surgeons up at the local hospital are also doing a significant. I don't know what the number is, but it's a significant number a year. So, the NSA Health says, "Oh no, you don't need that." I mean, this is lack of foresight, lack of understanding. So bureaucracy, I don't know what you call it, but that frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Gone are the days, and this is something that probably resonated in my family a lot, where the ministers used to be an ex-GP for, health minister used to be on the ground home.
Somebody who knew how the system worked.
Yeah. Right. So then you had like the education minister used to be a retired teacher or someone that's, lived, breathed and done that. So I feel that's lacking with decisions being made.
Yeah. If you want to be a politician these days, you've got to do law and business. You don't have to know anything about science.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you had to know something about science, we wouldn't have all those. I don't know if you can call a politician a quack. I mean, but it's an absolute insult to call a doctor a quack. Quacks were people who stood on the corner and sold narcotics to susceptible people back in the old days. But you've got politicians who talk absolute rubbish when it comes to science because they've had no training. Maggie Thatcher, she had a science degree. She knew what she was talking about. The English are on to the climate change thing. They know. When your Prime Minister is science trained and knows the power of science, science gets a look in. The UK science budget is healthy. Well, it was, and it might be under attack again. But I think again, I keep coming back to this. If you have a sick child, you don't call a fridge mechanic, right? You call a doctor. If you have a problem with your fridge, you don't call a doctor. It's horses for courses. And if politicians don't know enough about the field, if people these days like to think that they can go online and do some research and know everything, that is rubbish. It takes to basic medical training. If you're you join one of the postgraduate courses, the basic training is 4 years. Then you've got a compulsory intern year. Then you've got to go into a training program. I mean, to become a doctor these days, it's an absolute minimum of 10 years. And the bottom line is you don't stop learning because medicine changes so fast. And to think that you can just go online and look, read somebody's blog and then you know it all, that's deluding yourself, really.
Delusional, yes.
Yeah. People do it.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, doctor, I've done my research and I don't agree with you. Okay, go and see somebody else.
That's brilliant. I think you've nailed all that. That's really good.
You think we've finished?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
They were we'll snippet it out because it's obviously a long conversation.
Right. Well, when do we start?
All very valid points that.
It's a big topic. And we haven't touched on the problem that Australia's got with the federal-state divide. That is a massive problem, massive. And if the camera stops rolling, I'll tell you a few things.
But... I will. Yeah, I'll get you a microphone.
Oh, right.